from my little box, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm here. I'm Martha Zadowski, and I'm on the board, and I'm also on the events committee of the Friends of Pope Farm Conservancy. I'd like to welcome you all to our very first Zoom event. We're happy to see everyone, and I hope you enjoy the talk. Before I introduce our speaker, I want to mention that we have a second Zoom event coming up on October 4th. The topic is Native American spirituality and care for the earth. And we have Catherine Heskin from Edgewood College, who is a Native American. And she's going to talk about the land and the first inhabitants. And she's going to help us discover their spiritual wisdom, which I think is going to be especially significant during this time of all of these environmental challenges. So that's October 4th at 1 p.m. The link is on the website for the Friends of Pope Farm Conservancy. Okay, back to tonight. When you enter, we want you to mute yourself. And we want to do that so that there's not any background noise during Karen's presentation. We will be using the chat box to collect questions. And during the presentation, we will take a break to handle some of those questions. If we don't get to all the questions, they'll be saved and answered in a follow-up document. So mute yourself and use the chat box for questions. Okay, a little bit about Karen. Dr. Karen Oberhauser is the director of the UW-Madison Arboretum, and she is also the Aldo Leopold Professor of Restoration Ecology and a professor in the Department of Entomology at UW-Madison. She and her students have conducted research for many years on several aspects of monarch butterfly ecology. In addition to her research and her teaching, she started a nationwide citizen science project called the Monarch Larva Monitoring Project. And this project continues to engage hundreds of volunteers across the country. She has authored over 90 papers on her research on monarchs, insect conservation, and citizen science. She is also the chair of the Monarch Joint Venture and a founding officer of the Monarch Butterfly Fund. I can't think of a better topic and presenter for our first Zoom presentation. This evening, Karen will describe the amazing biology of migratory monarchs, how citizens and scientists are working together, and what all of us can do to help preserve monarchs for generations to come. Okay, Karen, take it away.
Okay, thanks, Martha, for that great introduction. And hello, everybody. I'm really sorry that we can't be together in the same room, but I guess then there couldn't be so many of us. So it's fun. I'm standing in my living room a mile away from the Arboretum, so you can picture where I am right now, but it's really fun to hear that there are people from all over the country at this presentation tonight. So thanks for being here. And like Martha said, we have a few Zoom hints. You're probably Zoomed out. You probably have been to a lot of pandemic Zoom meetings. But I just wanted to emphasize the chat box that if we were under normal circumstances right here, I could see you all in front of me and you'd be raising your hand and I would call on you. And this would be a very interactive conversation. But that doesn't work so well on Zoom. So what we've come up with is that you'll type questions in the chat box and then Martha will ask those questions at different times during our presentation. So I have a bunch of question breaks built into this. So hopefully you just ask a question like you would raise your hand and ask it during the talk, and we'll get to it pretty soon. We've got not just, you don't have to wait till the end for these questions to come in. So just type them when you think of them. And you'll see a slide like this. I've got these scattered throughout the talk, and that will be Martha's hint that she can start asking questions. So what I'm going to be doing tonight is kind of talking with you about monarch biology and conservation, but I wanted to start out, and just so we don't run out of time, just to point out that I really stand on the shoulders of giants right here. I'm not just talking about my research, I'm talking about the research of lots and lots of different people. So I just wanted to acknowledge the fact that I've been at the UW-Madison Arboretum for the past 3 years. Before that, I was at the University of Minnesota for most of my career. And I just had amazing students and staff in what we called the UM Monarch Lab over that time. And the picture on the top right here, I have this handy dandy little pointer. These are my students and staff that were with me in the last year. So that picture was taken just before I moved to Wisconsin. So really great people over the years. And a lot of what I'm saying is based on the work of my students. This is the Arboretum staff, another great group that I get to work with at the UW-Madison Arboretum. Just a great group, and I'll be talking about some of our work at the end of my presentation today. And I also wanted to mention the fact that a lot of what we know about monarchs, and thus a lot of what I'll be saying to you tonight, is thanks to the work of citizen scientists. And I'll be talking specifically about some citizen science programs, but really we would not know what we do today without the work of a lot of people who are involved in citizen science. So right now in a normal talk, I would ask you if you're involved with citizen science. So if you are, just think to yourself of the citizen science programs that you're involved with and know how valuable they are. You could even share some of those in the chat box if you wanted. It's really incredible to engage people in scientific research. And these two people here just happen to be my parents who have been involved in the monarch larva monitoring project for a long time. And then lots and lots of people that I've collaborated with. Those 90 papers are not sole author papers. They're just lots and lots of people that I've worked with over the years. Okay, so how I'm going to do this talk is I'm going to start out talking about monarch life history. You might know a lot about monarchs, or you might not know very much at all about monarchs. And no matter which group you're in right now, you'll have enough knowledge to understand the rest of the talk after this little introduction to monarch biology. So I'm going to start out just talking about the individual life cycle of a monarch. So we all go through life cycles, and this is the life cycle of a monarch. A monarch starts its life out as an egg, and here we see a picture of an egg laid on the bottom of a milkweed plant. Under normal summertime conditions, it's an egg for 4 to 5 days, but this can be a lot longer if it's cool out. So there's a monarch egg out there now, and you're in the Midwest, it's going to take it a long time to hatch because we're getting some cool nights now. So 4 to 5 days is an egg, usually laid singly on the bottom of milkweed leaves, but sometimes there can be multiple eggs on a leaf. Then they're a caterpillar or a larva for 9 to 13 days. And again, this depends on temperature. It's longer if it's cool. I just had one that I was rearing as part of a research project, and it was a caterpillar for about 20 days when it gets cool. Then it's a chrysalis or a pupa, and under the same temperature conditions, they're a pupa for about 1 less day than they're a caterpillar or a larva. And then we have the adult. And the adult lives, it really is variable. So the adults in the summertime that are non-migratory live for 2 to 6 weeks as an adult. And then the ones that you're seeing right now are going to live for 8 to 10 months. So these are the adults that migrate and will fly all the way to Mexico. And the reason that they can live so much longer is they, first of all, aren't investing any energy in reproduction. They basically just put off reproduction until next spring. So they're saving all that energy that they would otherwise put into reproducing if they're a male mating with females, and if they're a female producing eggs and finding places to lay them. And they also are going to these overwintering sites in Mexico where it's relatively cool. And because they're cold-blooded, their metabolism just slows down to the point that they can live a lot longer. So that's why we have this kind of separate life history for migratory monarchs and non-migratory monarchs. So we're going to think about all these stages, well, mostly just the adult and the caterpillar stage, and think about what they need to survive. So we have over 100 milkweed species that are native to North America, and monarchs cannot survive without milkweed because monarch caterpillars eat milkweed. It's the only thing they can eat. But there are lots and lots of milkweed species. So you're from all over. It sounded like most of you are from this part of the map that we just called the Northeast part of the United States, which is basically the northeastern quarter of our country. But we have milkweeds that are found in all of these different regions. I'm going to focus here on the Northeast in the beginning. So here are some of the species you might see here. This is whorled milkweed, or Asclepias verticillata. They all have Asclepias for their genus name. This is common milkweed, or Asclepias syriaca. You're probably familiar with swamp milkweed, the one over here. This one is called Asclepias incarnata. This is butterfly weed, or Asclepias tuberosa. And then, so now we're going to move out. So these are the ones that you might find in gardens around here. Then I'm just going to mention a few other species. This is Asclepias subulata, or desert milkweed, the one that I'm pointing to down here. And this is endemic to Arizona, so in this region of the map. And this is a really interesting milkweed because it really doesn't have leaves. You can just see stems there. And last time I was in Arizona, I took a picture. This is not a monarch, this is a queen, which is a close relative to monarchs, but you can see how they just eat the stems down, and monarchs do the same thing. This is antelope horn milkweed, or Asclepias viridis. This grows in Texas and kind of in other southern states. It's a really pretty green flowered milkweed. This is showy milkweed, which I've never seen growing in Wisconsin, but I know that there's somebody who said they're from Minneapolis. This one grows in the western part of Minnesota, but it's mostly a western plant, Asclepias speciosa. So just this incredible variety of milkweeds. Look at all those beautiful flowers. But all the flowers have the same general components which make them milkweed. So point of this, monarchs need milkweed to survive because it's all the caterpillars will eat, but there are many kinds of milkweed. Okay, now we're going to get to the adults, and I can't see you right now, but take a couple seconds and give yourself a little quiz, and let me know if you know which one, or just think to yourself, do you know which one of these is a male monarch and a female monarch? And there's one of each right here. And I'm just going to tell you, oh, this is so much less fun if I can't see you. But this is a male on this side because what I'm circling right here with my pointer of these little black spots on the hind wings. And these are specialized scales, and the males in close relatives of monarchs produce a pheromone, or a scent, that comes out of these special scales, and that attracts the female. So that's how you can tell if something is a male or a female. And if you also look here, the female, if you look at these lines on the female, they look a little heavier than they do on the male. These are veins that run through the wings. And the female doesn't have bigger veins than the male. She just has more black scales, or dark brown scales on top of those. And the female also is a little browner in the orange part. See if you compare the male, a little brighter orangish yellow right here. The female has some brown scales mixed in with the orange that make her just ever so slightly darker. But otherwise, they look pretty similar. It's hard to tell them apart unless you get a close look at them. Now, whereas the caterpillars eat only milkweed, the adult monarchs eat many, many different species of they eat nectar from many species of flowers. So I just put in here kind of a circle of the kinds of flowers that they might be eating in Wisconsin and Minnesota and other states close to us throughout the season. So I'm going to start here on the top. And if you are a plant person, you might be thinking she's got a lot of native plants up there, but not this one. This is lilac. It's not native. It's native to Eurasia. But it's a great nectar source for monarchs when they come back in the spring. And you may have seen lots and lots of monarchs on your lilac trees or other people's lilacs. So it's a great source of nectar for them in the spring when there's not a lot else available. And then as we move into the summer, we see coneflowers and bee balm. Joe Pye weed is a really great nectar source for monarchs and a lot of other species. You can actually see some other butterflies. There's the main one here, but there are other butterflies on this Joe Pye weed in this picture. Black-eyed Susan. This is New England aster here, and this monarch is sharing that plant with a bee. And then this is Liatris, or gay feather blazing star. This is in bloom right now. The monarchs just love it. It's like a monarch candy. So if you have this, you'll see a lot of monarchs. So they need nectar through their whole lives because for an insect, they're pretty long-lived. So they need to have nectar available all the time. So if you're planting a garden for monarchs, you want there to be flowers throughout the summer, starting in the early spring. All right, so now we're gonna move from the individual life cycle into what I call the annual cycle. So this is their migratory cycle. And monarchs right now, so we're gonna start with now in this slide, and this is what's happening to monarchs. They are leaving this northern part of their breeding range and flying south, funneling down through Texas to overwintering sites in Mexico. In a couple slides, I'm gonna show you where they are right now, as of today. There are a couple other arrows on this map that I want to point out. First of all, you see this line kind of going down into Florida. And we know that from tagging studies that a lower percentage of monarchs that are tagged up here get to Mexico. And we think part of that is they miss this turn to the west and they end up going down into the peninsula of Florida where they join a continuously breeding population in southern Florida. So those monarchs breed all winter long. Then we have a sort of separate population which migrates to sites along the coast of California. So these arrows, these monarchs are migrating now. But we do have some interchange between this population. So this arrow means that we know some monarchs from Arizona are found in the overwintering sites in Mexico. So it's not like this, the Rocky Mountains are the Berlin Wall of monarchs. There is interchange between these two populations. So monarchs are heading down for Mexico right now. I'm going to focus on these because this is what the vast majority of monarchs in the US and in the world, for that matter, because we have more monarchs than anywhere else in the world. This is what the vast majority of them do, is head through Texas into Mexico. So we're going to focus on those monarchs in the next pictures. So they get to Mexico. The monarchs that might have come from wherever you are up here in the northern part of the breeding range, they head down, get to Mexico. Those very same monarchs stay in Mexico all winter long. They start getting there in about November. They're flying now, they get there early November, and those same monarchs stay all winter long and start flying back into the southeastern quarter of the United States right here. And then their life is over. At this point, they're warming up, they're reproducing, so they can't make it all the way back here. And it's their offspring that continue with these arrows. So that's why I have broken arrows right here to signify that this is a new generation. And then they go through 2 to 3 generations that don't migrate. So these are the non-moving generations. They'll fly around, but they don't have directional flight. They're not heading north or south, they're just heading wherever they think they might find more milkweed. And then the cycle starts again in the fall. So this is an incredible cycle. We only learned that monarchs from up here went to Mexico in the 1970s. For a long time, people had no idea where monarchs went. And it's a result of tagging studies that we know where they go. People put little tiny stickers on monarchs' wings. So this was a citizen science project. It told us where monarchs go in the winter. So thanks to citizen scientists, we know where they go. But also thanks to the fact that monarchs gather in these overwintering sites every winter, we can assess the size of the population. So while it would be really difficult to know how monarchs are doing every year, we try and we can gauge it to a certain extent, but we depend on counts of these butterflies in the wintertime. So in Mexico, we actually measure the area that's covered with trees, covered with monarchs. And in California, and the sites along here, people actually count the individual monarchs and estimate the number of monarchs. So in the Western population, they measure in numbers of monarchs. In the Eastern population, we measure monarchs in hectares. So now I'm going to move away from this map, which didn't have any pictures on it, and just talk about what monarchs need during each of these stages of their life cycle. So right now, we're here right now. As they're migrating south, they need nectar. So here's an ironweed plant right here that this monarch is nectaring on. They actually gain weight during their migratory flight. They're eating so much that they gain weight. They're actually building up fat reserves that they can use all winter long. They don't fly at night and they don't fly when it's raining. So we often see these roosting sites. This picture was taken in Texas. This is a mesquite tree, but I really like this picture because you can see the little monarch that's joining its friends here on the mesquite tree branch. So they need nectar, they need safe places to stop at nighttime or during bad weather days. And then when they get to Mexico, their job is basically just to stay alive. So they do a lot of hanging out in the trees like these butterflies are doing, and they just hang there. They're saving energy. When it gets sunny, they'll fly up like these butterflies did. This was an amazing thing to look at. If you look, you see all different sizes of monarchs. And when I took this picture, I had binoculars with me and I could just focus my binoculars up as high as I could go. And there were monarchs in the sky that high. It was really, it's really amazing to see them there. And then as they're moving north in that part where they're moving back north in the spring, so that starts in mid-March, they need nectar again. So here we have our lilac again, just to emphasize that. And they need milkweed. So now they're starting to lay eggs again, and they can find little tiny plants. So this picture was taken in Oklahoma. This is a little green milkweed, green antelope horn milkweed plant. And you can see this female, maybe you can see that she's laying an egg on that milkweed plant. It really depends on how big your screen is, how well you can see that. And then when they get up here in the, usually arrive, so I'm in Madison, Wisconsin, they usually arrive here kind of mid-May. Then they go through these 2 to 3 breeding generations. The population is building up. So again, they need milkweed to lay their eggs on for the caterpillars to eat, and they need nectar plants. So this is a cycle, and it's like a chain. A chain is only as strong as its weakest link. If any one of these suites of conditions weren't available for monarchs, the migration wouldn't be able to continue. But I studied monarchs for about 10 years. I've been going to the overwintering sites in Mexico since 1996. I started studying monarchs in 1985, believe it or not. And since then, so I spent 10 years without going to Mexico. And then when I saw monarchs for the first time in Mexico, I really thought about the backstories behind these. I mean, we see all these butterflies hanging on a tree, but every single one of these butterflies is the result of an amazing story of survival. We're not going to talk too much about the caterpillars unless you have questions, but there's about a 5% chance that they'll survive, or even less, from egg to adult. So 95% of them never even become an adult. So these butterflies are, just by becoming an adult, they're amazing, but they've made this amazing migratory flight. So every time I'm in Mexico and look at the butterflies hanging out in the trees like this, I think of these backstories. And I think that every single one of these backstories started up here on a milkweed plant. So really, even though it's a chain and we need every part of it, this chain really does start with milkweed plants up here in the upper Midwest and northeastern US. This is the basis of the whole thing. All right, I'm going to take a break right now and look toward Martha on my screen and see if any questions have come in.
Yes, I've got a few questions, Karen. The first one is the monarch population down this year compared to last year and previous years?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And the population this year is lower than last year. And I'm going to show you a graph with this from the overwintering sites. It's lower than last year, but it's higher than some years. So we don't know yet because the monarchs aren't in Mexico, but I'm predicting that we will not do as well as we did last year.
Okay.
Northeast, I heard that somebody's from Delaware. People seem to be seeing more than normal in the northeastern United States, but here in the Midwest, it's been a little lower than last year for most people.
Next question, how are the western fires affecting the monarch migration in the West? Are they going to be detouring to the south instead of going to the coast, or do we know yet?
Yeah, that is a really, really good question, and we don't know. So monarchs will not migrate when conditions are bad. And I was actually just talking to a reporter in San Francisco about this today. So, you know, this is, as we all know, this is an incredibly unusual year in the West with the fires so widespread and in so many different places. So we're going to learn a lot this year, but we don't really know what's going to happen. What the hope would be is that they just hunker down and don't try to fly in these conditions and just get there. None of the main sites that they visit were actually burned in fires, but they are close to some of the fires.
Okay. When they migrate, do they migrate in groups?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And you saw that picture I had of them roosting at nighttime in groups. We think that they aren't at all social when they're flying. So you'll see individual monarchs. Sometimes you will see several migrating together, but we think that that's just because there are a lot of monarchs and they're all heading in the same direction. So it's not like geese where they have organized groups flying, but sometimes you see a lot, but not because they've made a decision to be together, if that makes sense.
Okay. And do other butterflies make the long journey like monarchs, or are monarchs really unique in this respect?
Yeah, so that's another great question. And I'm going to move on after this one, but I'm glad somebody asked this question. Actually, quite a few butterflies migrate besides monarchs. The one that you might be, or there's two that you might be pretty familiar with, the painted lady, which was fairly common this year. Another one is the red admiral that migrates, but no other butterfly in North America. Now, their painted ladies also live in Europe, and they migrate a long, long ways in Europe. They migrate actually down into Africa. But in North America, no other butterfly migrates as far as monarchs, and no other butterfly migrates in such an organized way that these butterflies are all going to exactly the same spot in Mexico. So it's a different kind of migration, but migration is not unique to monarchs among butterflies.
Oh, interesting.
Those were really great questions. And again, if we don't get to all your questions at the end, hopefully we'll be able to save them and we can send them out in a Word file or something.
Yep.
Okay, so now I'm going to move on. So now you know everything you need to know about monarchs to get the rest of my talk. And now I want to talk about the iconic nature of monarchs. And this is, you know, this is why there are 100 people here. Because you all have an interest in monarchs and you're not alone. People really, really like monarchs. Monarchs, you may have heard of the CEC, the Commission on Environmental Cooperation. This is a joint group for all of North America, Canada, Mexico, and the US. And their symbol is monarchs. It's a joint conservation group. Monarchs are the state insect or butterfly of more than 10% of the states in the United States. So you can see if the state that you're listening from is listed over there. This is our proclamation in Minnesota, where I lived in 1998, and I won't give the backstory on that, but it was kind of fun of how monarchs became our state butterfly. Just in case you're wondering if you where, I'd be interested if anybody knows. I wish I could ask you. The state insect, you can see Wisconsin is not on this list. We do have a state insect in Wisconsin, and it's kind of interesting. You can be thinking to yourself, do you know the state insect of Wisconsin? It's the honeybee, which is pretty interesting to me because that's not a native species. Honeybees were imported from Europe, but they're still great insects to have. So that's our state insect here in Wisconsin. So another thing that was really important, so monarchs are interesting to normal people like all of us here, but they're also interesting to people in very high levels of government. And I have this picture. It's very old right now. It's from 2014, but it was still an amazing event that has caused a lot of engagement in monarchs. And this was a meeting of President Obama and Prime Minister Harper from Canada and President Peña Nieto from Mexico. But these three men got together in 2014 in Toluca, Mexico. And if you can remember back to 2014, it was kind of like now. There was a lot of disagreement between countries. They didn't agree on free trade, and they didn't agree on immigration. And you might remember the Keystone Pipeline. There were all these things that they disagreed about. But they agreed on one thing at that meeting. And I blew that up. They agreed to create a working group to study ways to protect the monarch butterfly. So all of the heads of states in North America got together, and the one thing that brought them together was monarchs. And you know, that's kind of fun, a fun fact, but it was also very important because when President Obama came back from that meeting, he told all of the cabinet level, the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Trade and everyone else had to come up with ways that their organizations within the federal government were helping monarchs. So that was really important, and it has led to a lot of engagement of a lot of people in monarch conservation. But now getting back to normal people, monarchs are very intensively monitored. And like I said in the beginning, we know what we do about monarchs because of this fact. So I've kind of divided this graphic here into those 4 areas that I talked about, with the fall migration and then getting to Mexico, overwintering in Mexico, migrating back in the spring, and then going through this breeding period. But this list over here, and we're not going to have time to go through all these programs. You're saying, whew, good thing we're not going to go through all these programs, or you'd never get to bed tonight. But this list is programs where people are monitoring monarchs. And what I'm pointing out here in this circle is that we're monitoring every single stage of this annual cycle. And I did bold 2 of the programs in here that are headquartered at the UW-Madison Arboretum. So Journey North, I'll talk more about that in a couple minutes. But then also the Monarch Larva Monitoring Project, which I started when I was at Minnesota in 1997. But this program is now housed at the Arboretum. So we're doing a lot with monarchs here. So here's Journey North, and this is what I love about citizen science. Each one of the dots on this map represents a person going out and seeing their first monarch and reporting it to this website. So you can imagine that we get this picture of monarchs moving north in the spring, and kind of the yellow colors down here at the bottom are the monarchs that have come back from Mexico. And each one of these points is associated with a person and a date and a location. So we can see them moving back, and then the red is the next generation of monarchs recolonizing the rest of the country. So every one of these dots is a person seeing their first monarch. And if the dots have a little yellow spot or a white spot in the middle of them, there's a picture. So people can send a picture of their first monarch. So here's a picture from somebody in New York named Carol, who took the picture of the first monarch that she saw. So you can just search journeynorth.org and find these maps and find these pictures. It's an amazing program. So I promised you that I'd show you where monarchs are right now. So these are the monarchs moving south, and these are people reporting a roost, like that picture that I showed you of the monarchs in the mesquite tree in Texas. So they reported a roost. This is 2020. So we're down here as of today. I downloaded this picture. So here you can see people are starting to see these further south. Not quite down to St. Louis yet, but these are the monarchs heading out. And here's a picture that I just got. This is a picture that was taken at the end of August in New Holstein, Wisconsin. And here you can see monarchs in a tree in somebody's yard, and they saw a couple of hundred butterflies. So they give a little report of what they see. It's just an amazing way to track the migration. So if you see a monarch or you just want to see where they are, you can report or just see what's going on by visiting Journey North. So people are interested in monarchs and they are engaged in these citizen science projects. They're also creating habitat, and people are putting habitat. This is a nature center in Wisconsin. Here's somebody's backyard. This is in Michigan. This picture was taken at a national forest in Michigan. You can see the milkweed here. This is an old field in New London, Wisconsin. And I really like this slide because the person who took this picture and sent it to me said, she said, this is the best milkweed year at this site since 2005. Lots of rain, lots of sun, and lots of heat make for a great field of milkweed. So people are really noticing what's going on with monarchs. They're noticing what are good conditions for monarchs in their yards or their nature centers or old fields. They're monitoring these sites. So here's a sign that somebody put up. This is a program that we started at Minnesota, the Monarch Larva Monitoring Project. They just made this sign and put it up at their site, showing that it's a monarch site. People put up signs that show they have a monarch way station. That's what this sign is right here. So really great evidence of people's interest in monarchs. So now this is the depressing part of my talk. So hopefully you've been really excited about the biology of monarchs, and I won't be too long right here, but I just want to point out the fact that monarch numbers are declining, despite the fact that so many of us are interested in them. And I told you that we could estimate the size of the monarch population, at least the relative size from year to year, by measuring the area that they cover in Mexico. So here we have, since we started measuring them in 1993, right here, this is the annual area that's occupied by monarchs. And what you see is there's an overall downward trend, but there's a lot of year-to-year variation. And these ups and downs from year to year are driven by weather. And we're trying to figure out exactly what's driving this downward trend. Now, it's kind of hard to say when people say to me, well, how much has the population actually declined? You know, we could look at 2013, which was the lowest year ever. That year was 0.67 hectares. That's all the monarchs in that whole breeding range that you saw fit in an area about the size of a football field in Mexico. So that really brings home how small that is. 1996, we had a population almost 18 hectares. But what I like to do is really think of the decade averages. I think that gives us a better hint as to what's going on with the population. So if we look at the last decade, so these years are the start of the winter. So this is last year in Mexico. That winter started in 2019. So that decade, our overall average for those 10 years was 2.8 hectares. The decade from 2000 to 2009 was 5.84. We don't quite have a whole decade for our first part of this graph, but from 93 to 99, the mean was 9 hectares. So that's another way to see how the population is going down. Last year, which seemed like a pretty good year for us here, at least in Wisconsin, was average for that decade. but it was way below what we used to see for monarchs. We had a great year. We were kind of up to the old average in 2018. You can see that year we were almost up to 6 hectares, or a little over 6 actually. So, you know, it goes up and down. We have good years and bad years, but our good years now are kind of the old average years. So what's causing this decline? It's actually kind of complicated to understand what causes the decline, and sometimes I call it sort of death by 1,000 cuts. We have lots and lots of bad things happening to monarchs, but we have been trying to study what are the things that are most associated with low years for monarchs. So a bunch of us in a paper that was, the first author was Wayne Thogmartin, got together and did this big analysis of anything we could think of that could be that could be affecting monarch numbers from year to year. And just a summary of that kind of complicated study, what we did is we divided the country into regions that contribute to monarchs, that kind of are biologically relevant regions. So we have the North Central region, which is the main breeding part of monarchs, that head to Mexico. It's west of the Appalachian, west of the Appalachian Mountains, the Northeast, which are kind of separate monarchs in a lot of ways in the summertime. The South, where all these monarchs end up, and then where they just migrate through in Mexico. And we looked at weather conditions and other conditions in all these areas. And what we found is that 3 factors were really important in driving numbers from year to year. And one is glyphosate use. And glyphosate is Roundup. And this is an herbicide that's used in corn and soybean fields, and it can be used in more corn and soybean fields in the last 20 years because corn and soybeans are, for the most part, resistant. They're genetically modified to be able to tolerate glyphosate. And why that's important is because there used to be a lot of milkweed in corn and soybean fields, but there isn't anymore. So glyphosate use is kind of a way that we can get a handle on the decline of milkweed in agricultural fields. So more glyphosate gets used in ag fields, the lower the population is. This negative means there's a negative association between monarch numbers and glyphosate use. The other 2 factors that were important all took place in the North Central United States, and these were associated with weather. So the minimum August temperature. So if the minimum August temperature in the North Central United States was high, okay, so if we had high lows of hot August, there was a negative association. So hot August meant low numbers of monarchs. And so that's a fall impact. And this was important. This was the second most important explanatory factor. And the third was the number of warm days that we have in the North Central United States in early May. So this is a hot spring. If we have a hot spring, again, this is negative, a negative relationship. A hot spring is bad for monarchs. So just in summary, that was a lot of information. It's just telling you that the loss of habitat, especially in corn and soybean fields, and hot weather are associated with lower monarch populations. So it's habitat and weather are important. So there was some effect, but not as important as in the breeding range, but there is habitat loss going on in Mexico. We don't see as big a relationship between that and monarch numbers as we do between breeding habitat loss, but that's definitely important to them. And you can see some of the evidence of logging right here. This is a giant tree that got cut down in one of the overwintering sites. This area, you can kind of see the cleared area that I'm circling here with my pointer. This was logged completely off. This was forested, and this is an area, if you've ever been to these sites, this is Cerro Pelon, which is a mountain that monarchs overwinter on. And now they overwinter in other places kind of behind these ridges, but they used to winter here. Here you can see butterflies flying around, so the logging is occurring right in their overwintering sites. And a lot of this logging is really small scale logging. You know, people just pulling the branches out on their horses. So it's not always just big clear-cut lumbering. All right, we're going to take another question break. If there are questions here again, we can take a couple questions, Martha.
Okay, you answered two of the questions that we had. One pertained to global warming, and you talked about hot weather. And then the other one was the threats in Mexico, in the migration area. So you really responded to those. We had a question related to the migration. Do all monarchs who do they all migrate if they're living here in August?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And so I assume here, I'm going to assume here means Madison, but if you're in other places, it depends. If you're further south, it'll be a little different. But if a monarch emerges as an adult before about August 15th, it's going to be a breeding monarch. So it's going to produce eggs and mate, but it still might move south to lay its eggs. Because, you know, if a monarch lays an egg up here at the end of August, it's going to start getting cold and its eggs are going to develop more slowly. So those butterflies do move south, but they're not going to go all the way to Mexico. They can't live long enough. The monarchs that emerge after about August 15th will not be reproductive. And those are the ones that'll head all the way to Mexico. So it's kind of a dividing line in the middle of August.
How late can a monarch leave here and make it to Mexico?
Yep, great question. How late can they leave? So we have some records from tagging data, and the later they leave, the lower their chances are. But some monarchs that are tagged very late make it. I think my record for somebody in Minneapolis, so the person in Minneapolis, was October 10th. The butterfly that was tagged in Minneapolis on October 10th was found in Mexico. So basically it depends on the availability of food. So if we have a late fall where we don't get a hard freeze and there's still nectar around, then they can survive better. They can move south. But if it gets cold and there's no flowers available for them, then they will have a lower chance of making it successfully. So it depends.
We just got a question from one of the attendees, and the question is, are butterfly genes turned off or on to make butterflies know whether or not to migrate?
Yeah, so that's a really, really interesting question, and it's pretty well worked out. So it's hormonally driven. Their migration and their lack of reproduction are both driven by hormones, and so proteins, which are coded by genes, and they get turned on or off depending on the conditions they experience as caterpillars. So if they experience, mostly it's day length, if they experience shortening days in the fall, then they will migrate. And that changes their hormones. So it's hormonally driven. So they all have the same genes, but they are activated by environmental conditions. So that was a really good question.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Do we have time for one more, or should I save him for the next?
I think we better move along. I have a close eye on the right now.
Okay.
But we'll just keep going here, and then, but we'll save them.
Okay.
So monarch numbers are declining. So what do we do? And I want to kind of think through, so basically climate change is a big one. We should stop climate change, but habitat is also important. So I'm going to focus on habitat. So where can we find habitat? One of them is in urban and suburban spaces. This was my yard in Roseville, Minnesota. The person from Minneapolis will know where Roseville is. This was my yard. It was really great habitat for monarchs. They loved my yard. I could find a lot of them. Unfortunately, this is what a lot of yards look like. this is not good habitat for monarchs. So one thing we can do is take places that look like this. I mean, this is basically habitat for nothing in these pictures. Change this. That's one thing we can do to help monarchs. So change your yards for monarchs. Another thing we can do is promote policies that encourage farmers to set aside some of their land. So this picture was taken in Iowa. So here you see a cornfield. This is called a prairie strip. So this is some habitat in between sections of corn, and you can see here's a compass plant in here. This can be habitat for monarchs in this set aside land. There's a great program in Iowa, this Prairie Strips program. This was in the newspaper, in the Cedar Rapids newspaper a year ago, but you can see these prairie strips going through the field. So that's another thing we can do, is put it in agricultural habitat. Rights of ways are great for monarchs. There's roadside rights of ways, like this picture along Highway 35 in Minnesota. But there are also railroad rights of ways and utility line rights of ways. And these are nice because they're linear habitats, and they give monarchs the ability to fly from one good habitat to another. So we can put good habitat in rights of ways. Now we have to be careful about that. You can see along here, this road has been mowed, or this habitat has been mowed. So we shouldn't put habitat in there. Here's another picture of that. If there was a milkweed plant, if there were milkweed plants in there, they'd be cut down. So you have to watch where you put that in utility lines or any kind of right of way. What kind of management has to be done in order to make it safe for vehicles or people or utility lines? Another great category is protected lands. This is land that's already protected, and we can make that land better for monarchs. Another one is what we call marginal agricultural land. So this is a picture that was taken in Wisconsin a year ago in the spring. This is a cornfield. It's not going to produce a lot of corn this year, and there's a lot of land out there that's used for agriculture that really isn't great land for agriculture. So that would be another possibility, is to take some of this marginal agricultural land and have farm policies that support farmers in putting habitat here. Because basically, when a farmer puts habitat here, that farmer is doing something that's good for society. So he or she, in my opinion, should be compensated for that. Okay, so a lot of times people say to me, you know, I love monarchs. I've been studying monarchs for most of my career, and I really do love them. And people say to me, do you ever have hope? I mean, you know, all these things that are really going wrong for monarchs. And this is what gives me hope. It gives me hope that we have all of these organizations at an international level. We have organizations that are cooperating on monarch conservation. This is happening in Mexico, in the United States, and Canada. And I just want to mention one organization that I'm involved with. We have a great website, Monarch Joint Venture. So we're up to 90 actually organizations that are collaboratively promoting monarch conservation in the United States. And this is a picture of all of our logos. And what I did here, I know that you're not all from Wisconsin, but probably most of you are, is circled the Wisconsin organizations. Wild Ones is a national organization, but it's headquartered in Wisconsin. These are Wisconsin organizations that are part of the joint venture, but you can see we have big organizations like the U.S. Forest Service, the NRCS, which is a national organization, down to just little organizations in towns. Like here's Great Parks of Hamilton County, that's in Ohio, I believe. So all different organizations working together. So what we can do as individuals is we can make habitat for monarchs, we can be involved in these monarch citizen science programs, and support conservation organizations. And also what we can do is talk to people about the importance of habitat for monarchs. And, you know, it's going to take grassroots efforts because monarchs are spread all over the place. So we need to let people know what they can do to help monarchs. So I'm going to spend just a couple minutes here talking about the Arboretum, just because this is where I work right now. And I wanted to tell you a little bit about why it's a great place to be studying monarchs. So I'm going to go a little bit over 7:30. Hopefully that's okay for people. I can't look at you and see if it's okay, but
it's okay.
Is that okay?
Yes, it's okay.
So this is the Arboretum, and those of you that are from Madison probably know that although Leopold was actually the first director of the Arboretum, I'm the 8th director. But this is what he said at the dedication of this. This is the function of the Arboretum: a reconstructed sample of old Wisconsin to serve as a benchmark, a starting point, in the long and laborious job of building a permanent and mutually beneficial relationship between civilized men and a civilized landscape. And this is what we're doing, and I think monarchs really embody this, that in order to preserve monarchs, we need to have, this is my favorite line, I think, in all written words, a permanent and mutually beneficial relationship. This is what we promote. So at the Arboretum, we kind of have a three-pronged mission. We conserve the land that we have, we advance the field of restoration ecology, and we foster the land ethic through educational programming. For those of you that aren't here, we are right in the middle of Madison. We have 1,200 acres. Right in the middle of Madison. You can see an aerial view of this and a map of these 1,200 acres. We also have 513 acres of habitat in outlying properties. And you can see most of these are kind of around Madison. But we have one way up here near Minocqua, up here at Finnerud Forest. So we manage all of this land as well. And like I said, habitat is key to conserving monarchs, and with them many other species. We have garden collections. So there's the Longenecker Horticultural Garden, which is 35 acres big, the Wisconsin Native Plant Garden right around the Visitor Center, and another garden along Manitou Way. But most of our land is not in gardens. So the pink areas on this map, here's Longenecker and the Native Plant Garden. This is the Viburnum Garden and another little tiny area over here. But the rest of this land is managed in natural habitat. And I want to just point out the importance of restoration. We are considered to be the birthplace of the field of restoration ecology. We have the first restored prairie in the world, Curtis Prairie, which in normal times is right outside my office. We started putting native prairie plants in Curtis Prairie in 1936 in 60 acres of, this had been overgrazed pasture land. And why this is important is because we know now as conservation biologists that we can't just protect the land that's already there, protect the natural land that's already there. This is in a book by William K. Stevens about the field of restoration ecology. And I'm just going to read it to you because it's such a wonderful quote. No longer content to try to hold the line in an often losing attempt to protect nature, conservations are at last moving from the defensive to the offensive. They are striking back, and restoration is their tool. Restoration makes it possible to go beyond preserving what remains of nature to re-expand its reach. So this is what restoration is all about. And it's just so, so important that we take what land we can and we put habitat there for monarchs and so many other species. So I am going to skip over a couple slides here. I was going to talk a little about citizen science. We do a lot with citizen science here at the Arboretum. But just get to the end here so that you have more chances to ask questions. So often people say to me, why do you focus on monarchs? And, you know, I started focusing on monarchs just because I was so interested in their biology. But now, as a conservation biologist, I see monarchs as this flagship species. Monarchs exist in this really incredibly unusual mosaic of rare and pristine habitats. Native prairies, which are the most rare kind of habitat we have in North America right now. But they can also occur, they used to occur in cornfields, which I would argue are about as disturbed as you can get. You'll see milkweed growing in cracks and sidewalks. So they have this whole spectrum of habitats that they exist in. And when we protect those habitats, we share them, we're protecting many other species. So we're not just helping monarchs. Monarchs are incredibly interesting. They have this amazing migratory life cycle that is an unmatched biological phenomenon. So I would argue that what we do for monarchs can be really, really important, and it will lead to not only saving monarchs, but many other species as well. So with that, here's your last chance to ask me some questions.
I've got a few, Karen.
Okay.
If I want to raise monarchs, what can I do to make sure that they're strong and healthy?
Yep, if you're raising monarchs to make them strong and healthy, you want to keep them clean and well fed. So make sure that they're not living in a lot of their own waste. And if this person probably raises them, so they know that they produce a lot of waste. So you want them to give them fresh milkweed every day, clean out whatever containers you're using. And there's a lot of new research coming out about the importance of exposing them to natural conditions. So you should, if they're in your house, they should be near a window or somewhere where you're not going to have lights on at nighttime, or a screen porch, or a gazebo or something. You want it to be as natural as possible. So clean, well-fed, and exposed to natural conditions.
Okay. And then who tags monarchs?
Yeah, so if you're interested in monarch tagging, depending on where you live, if you're in the upper Midwest, you would get tags from a program called Monarch Watch. So you can tag monarchs through Monarch Watch, and who actually tags them, it's anybody. I know that you at Polk Farm Conservancy have monarch tagging programs. Right now they're tagging a lot at Goose Pond. We've had tagging programs at the Arboretum. So normal people tag them, and the program that runs this is called Monarch Watch.
Okay. And then one last question, and this is related back to the migration. How many miles a day do they fly, and what altitude are they at?
Oh, I'm so glad. Thank you, whoever asked that question. All right, how many miles a day do they fly? So a monarch, imagine a little normal sized paper clip. A monarch weighs as much as that paper clip. So the speed with which they fly is really going to depend on how the wind is blowing. On average, we think they go about 50 miles a day. If it's raining, or if there's a strong wind from the south, they're going to go. If it's raining, they won't fly at all. If there's a strong south wind, they'll go more slowly. But boy, a good sunny day with a north wind, they can go a lot more than 50 miles. How high? So that's such a cool question. And the answer to that is they can really gauge where the wind is. So if you're outside on a day that is warm, but there's a south wind, what the monarchs will do is fly really close to the ground where it's not so windy. But if it's windy, they kind of judge where the best place to fly is. And luckily, there was a guy named John Gibault who studied monarchs. He was studying monarchs in the 80s and 90s, and he was a hang glider pilot. So that was kind of separate from studying monarchs, but he would be really high up in the air studying them. And he sometimes saw them as high up as over a kilometer above the surface of the earth. Now, obviously, we're not going to be seeing them up there. So nobody would know that unless he had been up there with them. So they'll go really close to the ground or a kilometer or even more above the earth, depending on where the best wind conditions are for flying. It's amazing. And the other thing they can do is they use thermals. So if any of you have ever watched birds when they're migrating and you've gone to places like Hawk Ridge in Minnesota or other places where there are thermals and you'll see hawks like spiraling through the air, monarchs will do that too. So if there's a hill or something where the air current is going up or above a hot surface like a big parking lot or where there's a lot of heat coming up, they'll use these thermals and kind of go in circle and then they'll coast down. So what's neat about monarch flight is most of the time when they're migrating, they're gliding. So it's not that they're flapping their wings their whole way to Mexico. They're really energy efficient flyers and they don't flap as much as they glide. And so they have to be super smart about how they make this migratory flight. Oh, you can tell I'm so excited about monarch migration.
I'm going to collect the rest of the questions and we will get them to Karen and then we will post responses on our Friends of Pope Farm Conservancy website. And her presentation has been recorded. So if you want to watch it again, you can just go to our website and watch it over and over and over. I know I'm speaking on behalf of everyone, Karen, but I'd like to thank you so much for the great presentation.
Well, I'd like to thank you for inviting me and thanks to everyone for your great questions, for hanging in here. I see there's still 93 people in the meeting, so that's amazing. Feel free to contact me. My email address is up here and I will be really happy to answer any other questions you have, or if you live in Madison, to meet you. We could do a socially distanced walk at the Arboretum. So it was really great to be here and thanks for coming tonight and thanks for inviting me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.